Some of the greatest movies of all time are animated, including Spirited Away, The Iron Giant, The Incredibles, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. Animation has been around for as long as film itself, with many traditional animation techniques such as phenakistoscopes and zoetropes providing the precursor for the motion capture techniques that film would eventually take up. Animation has contributed so much to film. So, why is it that we as Americans treat it like an afterthought? Let me explain. When film was first gaining its footing in the early 20th century, it was a marvel to behold and a fun escape for many. About 65% of the US population went to the theater every week. Can you imagine that today? That's crazy. Anyway, when the TV was introduced, it ruined the golden age that Hollywood was having. It wasn't just a short drop. Attendance tanked. There are other factors that contributed to this besides the television, but that was the biggest one. Since then, Hollywood did whatever it could to keep its head above water, which can be seen in the late 60s when the era of New Hollywood began, ushering in new, young directors. This all changed after Steven Spielberg and George Lucas destroyed the independent film renaissance by releasing consecutive blockbusters. This started the modern idea where studios would rely on releasing expensive hits with mass national appeal in order to stay profitable. And that brings us to today. That's interesting, but what in the world, you ask, does this have to do with animation? Well, due to the national state of film attendance, this has affected the way we as Americans view animation. For starters, we view it as a genre and not a medium. What does that mean? Well, according to the Oxford Dictionary, a genre is a style or category of art, music, or literature. So what's wrong with that? It sounds like that's what animation is, a group of films made in the same style. Well, not exactly. Because when you think of other genres, like action or comedy, you also think of the emotions they elicit, like tension or happiness. Animation is not one of those. As Brad Bird, director of The Incredibles, says, "A Western is a genre. Animation is an art form, and it can do any genre." Animation is the medium in which a genre is made, but because it's often thought of as a genre, it elicits grouped up emotions that other genres do. That is what we see today when people in America think of animation. They think of kids' movies. How did this happen? Let's take it back to our previous point. Movies made with mass national appeal in order to obtain profits for large studio heads. This is why for the past couple of years, decades even, we've seen a decrease in risk-taking. The major companies have found what works and don't plan to deviate from that. While there have been many live-action kids' movies, and there continue to be, animation found a niche in attracting young children, no matter the genre. And there's a reason for this, says College of St. Scholastica Interim Vice Dean Mike Marsden. For one, most children's shows are animated, so going to the theater to watch a full-length animated movie is a key part in the progression from television to movies. Another thing is the transcendence of reality, which is more appealing to young ones. On top of this, for parents who are worried about content intake, most animated violence does not have consequences, which is not so true anymore for the modern live-action film. To sum it all up, animated movies have special positives for both the children and the adults. Studios capitalized on this and began churning out animated movies with a concentration on child audiences. That is why the general American, when thinking of animation, will in parallel produce thoughts of kid movies. Enjoyed by adults for sure, but aimed at kids. While this may not matter to most, it still does a great disservice to those who are active participants in the medium. Animation has often been relegated to sit in its own corner at the kiddie table, as if it's not worthy enough to compete with the real films. I can state countless Oscar years where there was a more deserving Best Picture nominee just sitting in the Best Animated Feature pile, and a surprising amount of them are foreign films. That brings up another thought. Are animated films thought of the same way in other countries? Well, I'll save you a long-winded explanation. The answer is no. Animation is treated very differently outside of the US. One of the best examples is France. France in general has one of the greatest movie industries in the world and is cited as the birthplace of cinema. The very essence and ideals of French film rivals that of the US. French film is often viewed as subtler and quieter, with a focus on characters rather than the narrative itself. US film, on the other hand, is fast, loud, and often built around a simple three-act structure that very rarely lends itself to narrative surprises. Another issue is how film is perceived in the public eye. The US film industry advertises itself in a way that invites as broad and general an audience as possible, even going as far to televise their own award ceremonies. Cannes, on the other hand, an arguably more important festival than the Oscars, is very prestigious, only opening its doors to the very best in cinema, and only very recently allowing the public a glimpse of what goes on, with short live-streamed events and Cinema de la Plage. To sum these ideas up shortly, most of American film is made for the purpose of public consumption, while most of French film is made for the purpose of artistic creation. France carries this idea over to Annecy, a prestigious film festival devoted entirely to animated film. That's not to say America doesn't have animated film festivals, but none of them are nearly at the same level as Annecy, where even many high-budget American animated films choose to premiere. And of course, it's unfair to compare the two because the Oscars are more American-oriented, whereas Annecy focuses on the whole world. However, there's many factors that still allow the comparison, like the fact that Annecy has existed since 1960, unlike the Oscars, which only very recently introduced a consistent category for animated film, although other award ceremonies did not introduce it until even later. Point being, for a long time, animation was not recognized as a prestigious artistic form in the same way that live-action movies were. Another country where animation holds more weight is Japan. Japanese animation, more commonly referred to as anime, has more recognizable effects on everyday culture than in the United States. On top of this, most of their highest-grossing films are anime, with 5 of the top 10 highest-grossing films in Japan being animated. On top of this, Japan's highest-grossing domestic films are all anime. These films faced heavy American competition in their respective years, which they usually blew away. Comparatively, of the highest-grossing films in the US, only 2 of the top 20 are animated, not even top 10, top 20, and they're both sequels. And of course this brings us back to the discussion on how film studio heads push to produce big live-action blockbusters because they gross the most, as opposed to animated films. As they should. As long as there is a market for it, executives will pursue it. Look at TV. The world of television is very different. While there are many live-action TV shows, there are also a healthy amount of animated shows, especially those aimed at a more adult audience. Even if they don't compare in number, most rival the best shows in quality and creation. But TV show popularity is its own bag of worms, so we'll just move on. Honestly, if I had to answer the question we stated earlier in one word, the answer would simply be money. The financial success of American films has diverted which films are made for which target audience in order to squeeze the most profit out of them, even if the film could be much better. This goes back to the previous idea of how animation has been ingrained into American society as a children's genre due to its popularity with that audience, rather than a mature film style which can pull its own weight. The French see it as a medium for artistic expression. The Japanese see it as a pop culture phenomenon. America uses it mostly to A. keep fussy children occupied, and B. pander to the nostalgia of animated films long past. And of course, this isn't true of all animated films. There are some American-made animated films that easily surpass some of the best live-action films Hollywood has to offer. But the priorities are definitely present, especially when you consider that the highest budget for an animated film was for Tangled, and most of it went to animating hair instead of figuring out a better motivation for Mother Gothel. I guess Disney noted this and decided to use all the Tangled assets in Frozen. Either way, it's good to see animated films see a rise in modern-day prevalence and appreciation. In fact, a few animated films with the help of strategic marketing have been nominated for Best Picture. By the way, did you know that films perform marketing campaigns in order to help be considered for awards? I didn't know that. I just thought they were selected by a group of people who loved movies. Very interesting. But that's besides the point. Animation is on an upslide in popularity, if not in maturity. It has been sidelined, but not yet forgotten. It is up to us, the general public, to make sure it won't be. Thanks for watching.